It's about 3 p.m. on the 17th of July, 2021. I believe, under the circumstances, it would be prudent to continue in something that I've been doing for a while and had removed myself from actually being consistent with due to concerns. But under the circumstances, it appears to me to be necessary to resume in accordance with the original intent, which is that I have been providing follow-up reports to previous reports that I filed with federal agencies and or other sort of regulatory bodies for the last several years concerning allegations of fraud or other crimes in attendant with what I have been seeking redress for through both the judicial branch and the legislative branch, and as necessary, whatever executive agencies on both the federal level and the state level, not exclusive to the state of Texas, by the way. I'm going to try this a bit differently based upon the current circumstances, and rather than just giving a follow-up report as if it is a statement of facts within a particular timeline, I'm going to acknowledge that today would be the third anniversary of a report to the Securities and Exchange Commission, specifically connected to acts of securities fraud that I alleged were ongoing in connection with me being trafficked to Dallas, Texas, in time for a more than $300 million municipal bond issue by Bank of America to the Dallas-Fort Worth area. This bond had been, presumably at least, locally approved through legislative procedure more than a year prior to the actual issuance of the bond. I believe I have all the primary source information I need to substantiate my charges. Nonetheless, today would be the third anniversary of a follow-up report I did regarding the original allegation I submitted to the Securities and Exchange Commission, and it's important because when I filed that report, it was my first effort to contact the Securities and Exchange Commission, wherein I was issued an actual report number from the Securities and Exchange Commission. And the report number had a two-letter acronym that was at both the beginning and the end of the actual number. That two-letter acronym was HO, then a series of digits, HO. And to be honest with you, my first inference was that it was an anti-Irish hate crime. But we are where we are, and so I am going to ground where we are. I'm going to start with a brief reading from page 121 of this book I have, The Texas Senate, Volume 1, Republic to Civil War, 1836 to 1861, edited by Patsy McDonald Spa. I'm going to briefly read two paragraphs, starting with page 120 and ending on page 121. The senators welcomed the second bill, which originated in the House for the election of a major general. Houston vetoed this bill as well, but they overrode him on January 16, 1843. Through its provisions, the two chambers proceeded to elect Thomas J. Rusk as Major General of the Republic to serve until the first day of 1844, when he or his successor would have been sanctioned by a popular election. Rusk was empowered to take the field at any time and command any number of troops. Since he would receive compensation only if 1,000 or more soldiers were under his command, Congress provided a ready incentive for him to muster a large force. The measure provided for a general mobilization of the militia to expedite recruitment. Spoils would be divided among the captors by the field officers, without regard to rank. 6 companies would be mustered quickly for patrol along the southern border, and martial law was declared for the region between the Frio River and Nueces River and the Rio Grande. The second bill for the organization of a company of mounted men to patrol the border with Mexico was rushed through both houses on the last day of the session, January 16, 1843, and was signed by Houston. Second paragraph. The Senate did not provide for the Navy, but rather in secret session authorized the president to sell the entire Texas fleet. This act brought about a heated conflict between Houston and Commodore Moore. Houston, after recalling the Navy, had suspended all intercourse with the government of Yucatan. He did not believe that it had been a wise move in the first place to enter into an agreement with Yucatan and placed the blame for endangering Texas squarely on Lamar. Trying to rally support among the senators, he pointed out that they had been given no opportunity to approve or disapprove his predecessor's treaty with Yucatan, as he did not wish to, quote, soil his skirts with the crime of treason, end quote. Houston had broken off the agreement. Greer spearheaded the movement in the Senate to sell the Navy, which reached a successful climax with the adoption of a joint resolution through a conference committee in January 1843. Moore returned his fleet to be sold at Galveston later that year, but not before fighting two sharp engagements for the Yucatan government against the Mexicans during the summer. He also challenged Houston to a duel for having labeled him a pirate. But the president declined, as he always did, adding to the frustration of his enemies. Now, one thing you might notice is they refer to Houston as president, but also that at this time, pistol dueling was legal in Texas. As I recall, it was also legal in the federal level, including in and among members of Congress. I mention this because I believe this story in the history of Texas is actually very relevant to what is going on right now, specific to the state of Texas. It is my understanding that members of the Texas legislature have removed themselves to Washington, D.C. I made a public notice within the last 48 hours that I believe that another strategy would have been more prudent than for all of the members to remove themselves to Washington, D.C. But upon reflection last night regarding current events, including the reactions of the lieutenant governor and aspersions that have been cast on the people of Texas by those maintaining that they are representing the people of Texas, I believe that their strategy may have some merit and would like to offer my reflections, especially in consideration of the fact that I had attempted to file formal charges requesting assistance with articles of impeachment against the Texas State Senate for its refusal to hold egregious violations of the Constitution by the governor of Texas accountable. And hence, an impeachment of the Texas State Senate as a class was necessary in order to restore and maintain the good faith and credit of the people of Texas to prevent against default that could be used to aid and abet our enemies. I still hold to this. I have said elsewhere that the governor specifically, within the last year and a half, has taken public action. It has not been repudiated by any member of the legislature, at least not publicly, that have engaged the state of Texas in acts of securities fraud with very substantial consequences, at least two of which have directly undermined the authority of the federal government to provide a support to the people of Texas in the event that there would be a necessary mobilization in order to defend the people of Texas, including against any effort at foreign incursion into Texas or against any sort of internal violent, unconstitutional insurrectionary effort. I believe what he's done is compromise the capability of the people of Texas to provide for their own self-defense and self-protection, and also puts anybody who would be our allies in a very awkward position, potentially inculcating themselves into a nexus of crime that would compromise the safety and security of their own people. Upon some reflection, I believe that there may have been some prudent engagement by the members of the Texas legislature that removed themselves to Washington, D.C. Under the Texas Constitution, Texas is identified as an inviolably sovereign state, subject only to, and subordinate under certain circumstances only to, the federal Constitution. It also has a specific section that says that the people of Texas have the right to alter, abolish, or reform their government as they see fit. Now, the federal Constitution does not include a right to abolish the government. I do not know how many states within the United States have a constitutional provision providing for the abolishment or the abolition of the government as it stands. I put on the public record at my own prompting that I supported at a specific period of time a potential process for engaging a referendum in order to discuss whether or not Texas should secede. I believed at the time I had a specifically constitutional argument, but in order for that to actually hold merit constitutionally, there were certain actions that needed to be engaged by those alleging they represent the people of Texas that would then assert and demonstrate the authority of those representatives to accurately represent the people of Texas. Such did not occur. On the contrary, what ended up happening was, I believe, a successful challenge to any legitimacy for Texas to secede from the federal government as being demonstrative of an act of sedition against the federal government, and potentially being evidentiary of other crimes, including greater crimes that might even be labeled literally as treason in consideration of alternative action that was taken. However, the removal of members of the legislature by as I understand it, members of the legislature, which they have the constitutional authority to do, to the District of Columbia, leaves open a novel possibility that would not otherwise exist, which is the possibility for bringing a constitutional challenge to the currently constructed government of Texas for failure to fulfill the duties they are obligated to fulfill under the Constitution of Texas. In some ways, the removal by these individuals, in accordance with whatever the understanding is of the necessitation of such removal, provides for that possibility that may not otherwise be available. There is no constitutional authority for Texas as a state to secede from the federal government at this point in time, but there is no constitutional preclusion for the people of Texas, including through their representatives or the representatives of Texas that are actually constitutionally authorized, to exercise their constitutional right to alter, abolish, or reform the government of Texas, and in so doing would then leave open another consideration of what would be an appropriate course of action for what would remain after that process in consideration of the relationship of the people of Texas, or what was formerly identified as Texas, to the federal government. This would be provocative, it would be disrupting, but I also believe it would be moral. Now, I had attempted to go through the judicial system myself in order to seek support in bringing articles of impeachment against the Texas State Senate. To this time, I have not been met with a due consideration that has allowed for a process that I do not believe is not itself an attempt to elicit a kickback in an effort to not undermine whatever would be democratic and constitutional, but also to try to compel me to concede to cooperation with the criminal conspiracy at hand. On the other hand, though, there may be merit in understanding, is it actually possible and constitutional for a federal legislature to engage in a process to support an impeachment of a state legislature at the behest of other members of the state legislature, if it can be understood that there is a flagrant violation of the Constitution ongoing in that state, including in connection with acts of abuse of office by the governor in manners that would jeopardize and compromise the health and safety not only of the people of that state, but potentially people of other states and maybe even other nations. I believe that right now this is the constitutional question at hand. The question is, are the people that are currently located in Washington, D.C., in a situation where they have the authority and the capability to follow through on seeing some sort of merit being accorded to that consideration and making it a reality for the people of Texas? I am not exactly certain what the personal motivations are for individuals to allow themselves to be in a situation where the people of their constituencies are not provided with their direct protection by virtue of being on site in the state of Texas. It is a very different consideration of what kind of protection they are providing to the people by virtue of their removal. It can, however, be something that is motivating to those of us that are in Texas and that understand ourselves to be in a peril, whether it be a peril to our life, our livelihood, or even the future of ourselves or our families. Major consideration in that regard comes to an honest question. Do these legislatures and these members of the legislature that have removed themselves from the state of Texas understand that they personally have been threatened with assassination or some form of fatal reprisal for their political positioning, including political positioning they understand to be completely constitutional? Is part of that threat to their life in some manner connected to the fact that they have either been witness to or either direct or inadvertent accomplice to egregious violations of the Constitution that would substantiate, I understand, a process for impeaching the current governor as well as the Texas State Senate as a class? And if so, then it must be understood you are a representative of the people. You're representing us. So if you understand yourself to need to remove yourself from the state of Texas out of fear for your life, then I believe it behooves you to be honest with us about that. In order for us to be able to understand how we are reflected abroad, including outside of the borders of the state of Texas, in what would be considered a comportment in accordance with our needs by virtue of allowing for ourselves to be represented by your actions. I am on the record for a considerable amount of time. I don't do lesser evilism. I would never, at least until thus far, allow myself to be allied with a member of the party of the Democratic Party. The history of slavery that is comported in accordance with the formation of the Democratic Party, to me, is one of the most detestable things that has ever happened to political organizing, not only in the United States, but globally, and the failure of members of the Democratic Party to take full stock in that history up until now, while they purport themselves to be champions of liberalism, is not only disingenuous, but it's undermining of the people directly. However, in a time like this, character can be demonstrated by action in accordance with one's morality and understanding of who they are and where our self-interest lies. I believe there is a possibility here for the people of Texas to be redeemed without having to violate anything we hold sacred. I'm hoping you can rise to the occasion.